Hello everybody, this is General Yanis, and today in Death Card Tactics I'm going to be making a big review of all our foot-borne troops. Let's say not all our infantry, but today I'm going to be looking at the Plague Marines, the Blightlord Terminators, the Deathshroud, the Possessed, the Spawn, the Poxwalkers and the Cultists, and comparing them in different categories to see which one is the best or for what role can each of them be used, and are some better than others. So with no further ado, let's get started. So today, Sunday the 31st, the last day of January, still no sight of my Codex and my Malignifier. I have at least played a couple of games on TTS, Tabletop Simulator, with a new death card, and so far 2 out of 2 victories for Mortarion and the company. So praised be Nurgle and the Plagueverse Crawler Stratagem. And in this video, as I said, I will review and compare our 7 foot squads, let's say, and in lack of a better word, as not all are infantry. So the cow spawn are beasts and all other are infantry, but basically I can't call them infantry squads. So normally this type of squads would constitute the bulk of our army, and then we have our characters, and then we have our vehicles on top of that. So these are quite significant units to understand, and to understand their strengths and weaknesses. So I will be looking at these 7 units: the Plague Marines, the Poxwalkers and the Cultists, our troops basically. Then we have the Blightlord Terminators, Deathshroud Terminators, Possessed and Chaos Spawn. And I will be trying to analyze them in some categories, like a general overview. Then I will be looking at range damage, melee damage, durability, and finally some conclusions and what kind of role I believe these units are suited for. So let's start with an overview before diving into the data. So let's take a look. So starting with this overview table, I'm looking at these 7 units and looking at some general things. So we see, of course, all the units here, and we have the points per model. So Plague Marines are 21 points and 31 for special weapons. The Poxwalker and the Cultists are the cheapest per model. And then we have the Blightlord Terminators, 40 points or 45 depending on special weapon. Deathshroud Terminators are 50 points, Possessed 24, and Chaos Spawn are 23 points. And the squad sizes you can see here. And basically the smallest you can take is you can take 1 Chaos Spawn is 1 unit, or you can take 3 Deathshroud Terminators to make a small squad. And here you can see the cheapest squad possible, how many points that would cost. So for example, if you take the minimum of Plague Marines with no special weapons, that's 105 points. The minimum Blightlord Terminators, you're already investing 200 points, and the cheapest Chaos Spawn is 23 points, and then you can add higher squads. So sometimes you're strapped for costs, and then you need some cheaper unit to fill out something, and then, for example, Poxwalkers and Cultists can fill out the last points you need to save points on other things. If we look at their battlefield role, these 3 others are troop choices, of course. Then we have our elite choices, and the Chaos Spawn is a fast attack unit, so it would be competing, let's say, with a 30-blow drone and other vehicles to fill out the fast attack slots. And the troops, of course, we need always to take some troops to make detachments, the normal detachments, at least patrol and battalion, etc. And all of them, the 6 here are infantry, but the Chaos Spawn is beast, and of course sometimes you need a keyword for infantry, then of course the Chaos Spawn is not eligible for that. If we look at which units are core units and bubonic Astartes, which are some very important keywords that affect a lot of buffs and auras, we see it's the Plague Marines, the Blightlords, the Deathshroud and the Possessed. And then if we look at which ones have objective secured keyword or ability, it's the Plague Marines and the Poxwalkers, and unfortunately none of the others. For example, the Cultists. An objective secure can be really important to keep the objectives, even if some opponent deep strikes and tries to take some objective from you. As long as one model is alive, you are still keeping that objective, and that could be a very big difference, scoring 5 points or 5 or 10 points per round, depending on what you lose here. So the objective secure can be really important. All of them have the contagions of Nurgle, except the Cultists. Basically, Cultists are the only one in our Codex with no contagions of Nurgle. And then there are some limitation in taking Poxwalkers and Cultists. We can take maximum as many units of Poxwalkers as we have bubonic infantry. So the bubonic infantry, of course, would be Plague Marines, Blightlord Terminators, Deathshroud, and Possessed. And the Cultist is also the same. And then for these extra choices, we have the rules of maximum 3 units per army for matched play. So, but Plague Marines, you could have as many units as you want because they are troops. If we look at importantly to win games, of course, we need victory points, and sometimes we want to make secondary actions. And all of them, the infantry guys, they can do this, the secondary action, except the Poxwalkers, they have a limitation that they only can do death card specific action. They cannot do, for example, raise banners or investigate sites or some of the other secondary options. And the Chaos Spawn, not being infantry, they cannot do actions either. And then if we look at which ones have Plague Company keywords, so they can benefit from Plague Company contagions, it's all of them against except the Cultists. Then if we look at their base durability, we see here the toughness. Basically, the elite troops, they have toughness 5. Poxwalkers are now starting with toughness 4, which is very good, and Cultist has the lowest toughness of 3. The Chaos Spawn can be upgraded before the game to receive toughness 6, but normally it doesn't make a big difference, the jump from toughness 5 to toughness 6, as there is a big difference from toughness 4 to toughness 5. And the wounds for all the units. And then if we look at their save and invul saves, we see that the Terminators, the Blightlord Terminators and the Deathshroud Terminators, they have a 4+ invul save. The Possessed have a 5+ invul save, and the Chaos Spawn don't have invul save and only 5+ save. And then we see Disgusting Resilience. They have it, but not the Poxwalkers and the Cultists. And the Chaos Spawn, they don't have it, but they can get it with the same stratagem that gives them also additional toughness. So this can be quite buffing, it can be quite boosting to their durability, as we will see a bit later. Some other are morale rules. Plague Marines, Terminators, Deathshroud and Possessed are remorseless. They have quite good leadership. The Chaos Spawn is not remorseless, but has quite high leadership. The Cultists, they have poor leadership. And the Poxwalkers are quite interesting. They have a 6+ Feel No Pain. They don't have any save, so that's their save, ignoring pain, which is quite good. But there is a stratagem, Dead Walk again, for 1 command point in your command phase. You can select the Poxwalker units once per battle. And then you roll 7 dice, and on a 3+ you can bring dead Poxwalkers back. So you can really refill your units with this stratagem. And of course, every time they kill an enemy infantry or beast or something that's not a vehicle or a monster, they can get 1 lost guy back, and they are mindless and they don't take morale tests. So even if they have a very low leadership, they will not. They take losses and they don't care. They will just stay on the objective until they are all killed. And then you have these stratagems that you can basically bring back Poxwalkers, so they can be really good and tough to remove from objectives. And then in order we can buff their durability for Plague Marines, the Blightlord, the Deathshroud and the Possessed, which are bubonic Astartes infantry, we can get the Surgeon's 6+ Feel No Pain, and he can also heal them. And we can also give them putrescent vitality, at least giving more toughness, the psychic power. And the Chaos Spawn, as I said, it can be increased the durability by the stratagem. If we look at their mobility, Plague Marines have a movement of 5 inches. Poxwalkers are slowest for 4 inches. The Cultist is faster at 6 inches. The Blightlord Terminators and the Deathshroud have been improved by having a 5-inch and no penalty for advancing. And then the Possessed and the Chaos Spawn, they have 7-inch base movement, so those are a bit faster than our rest foot units here. the Plague Marines, the Terminators, and the Possessed, they have the Inexorable Advance, which gives them no penalties for moving. And the Noxious Blightbringer can buff those with +1 to move. And the Plague Marines are the only guys that can be going into the Rhino transport. The other cannot be transported by Rhino, which is, for example, not so good for the Possessed to be able to bring them forward quickly. On the Land Raider, they can fit, but not, for example, Poxwalkers and Cultists. They are not bubonic Astartes. But here the Possessed and the Terminators, they take 2 slots instead of 1. And then, of course, very importantly for our Terminators, they can deep strike, so they can come quickly into battle by deep striking, and even if they are slow, they can come into the thick of battle. Our Plague Marines can be moved up by Rhinos, but here the Possessed and the Chaos Spawn and all the others, they probably have to foot slog if they want to come up the field. Looking at the ranged and melee damage overview, we have our basically only the Plague Marines, the Cultists, and the Terminators. They have some ranged damage. The other units don't. The ballistic skill is 3+ for our elite units. The Cultists are only 4+. In the ranged options, we have quite considerable ranged weapons we can select from in the Plague Marines and the Blightlord Terminators. The Deathshroud Terminators, they have a standard Plague Spurt gauntlet, so they cannot choose any other, let's say, other weapons. And the range damage can be buffed, and buffed significantly, especially by the Taliman. The Taliman's relic, the Tollkeeper, giving exploding 6s, can really benefit Plague Marines and the Terminators. The Inexorable Contagion, giving more AP, can also buff them. The Plague Marines have grenades, so they can be buffed by Biologus Putrifier being close to them, so they can throw stronger grenades. They can also take the Sigil of Decay, which boosts a little bit their bolters, and we can use some stratagems, etc., to boost the Plague Marines. A lot of the others, they don't have so much range. I mean, the Cultists, you cannot buff them because they are not bubonic Astartes, so they cannot benefit, for example, from rerolls, and they are not core, etc. If we look at the melee damage, we can see here the weapon skill for the different units, and of course all units have a melee profile. So here the Deathshroud Terminators stand out. They have a 2+ weapon skill. The Possessed, the Blightlords, and the Plague Marines have 3+, and the Poxwalkers, Cultists, and Chaos Spawn have 4+ weapon skill. So the Poxwalkers got a bit improved. Before they only had this if they were 10 or more. The strength, the base strength, is 4 for the Terminators and Plague Marines. The Possessed and the Chaos Spawn are stronger. They are 5. The Poxwalkers and Cultists are 3, and the Poxwalker strength could be boosted by Typhus nearby, giving them a strength of 4. They have 2 attacks, the Plague Marines, and Poxwalkers also have 2. The Blightlord Terminators have 3, and the Champion has 4, and the Deathshroud Terminators, they have 4 attacks, and the Champion has 5. The Possessed, they got a good buff of number of attacks, so they have 4. And the Chaos Spawn has 2d3 attacks. In the melee options, the Plague Marines again have a big variety of weapons to choose from their standard Plague Knife, which is actually not very bad, but they can get flails and cleavers and other stronger melee weapons. And the Poxwalkers, and the Possessed and the Chaos Spawn, they cannot change. They have their standard melee weapons. The Deathshroud Terminator, they have the Man Reaper, which is really good, and it has 2 profiles, one anti-horde and one with more attacks, and one stronger for tougher, let's say, enemies. And the Blightlord Terminators also have some options in melee. They have the Bale Sword or Axe as a standard, and then they can take a Flail of Corruption to do more damage in melee. And of course, in some of my previous videos, I've been analyzing the Plague Marines, all their weapon options, and the Blightlord Terminators, all their options. So I will not go into super detail on those in this video, but you can watch the other videos here. The ways to buff the melee damage. The Biologus Putrefier has the foul infusion that he can select one unit, and then that unit does mortal wounds on 6 to wound in melee combat with plague weapons, and basically he can target the core bubonic Astartes units, so it's the Plague Marines, the Terminators, and the Possessed, but not the others. The Plague Marines can, for example, use the stratagem Trench Fighter to give them extra attacks with Plague Knives. The Poxwalkers have an interesting stratagem, the Mutant Strain, which gives them on unmodified 6s to hit, the opponent gets mortal wound. The backside to that is that the Poxwalkers themselves get a mortal wound on 1s to hit, but at least they have a feel no pain and they have the possibility to come back to life. So it's quite nice and thematic fitting that the Poxwalkers would, like a horde, they will do more damage but kill themselves in the process, but maybe they will take down a valuable target for you with the mortal wounds. And of course, on top of, for the damage, on top of the specific buffs for ranged or melee, we have general things that buff the damage. All the Lords of the Death Guard have reroll 1s for core units, so again they only help the Plague Marines, the Terminators, and the Possessed. And the Tallyman can select a unit to get +1 to hit. We can also get Arch Contaminator to help the core units with their melee and ranged 12-inch weapons. And for example, Terminators, they have some stratagems to improve Vermid Whispers, but this is by no means a complete list of buffs. There are others. We have the Corrosion stratagem, we have the Haze of Corruption, we have Putrescent Vitality, etc. And it can be quite a lot of buffs we can use situationally, but normally they benefit. Typically, they benefit our core units, which are Plague Marines, Terminators, and the Possessed. So this is, let's say, the overview. Let's start looking at the range damage comparison. First let's look at the squads for comparing, and we will be comparing them per point, of course. But first, for Plague Marines, because they have so much weapon options, I will be comparing 4 squads. We have first the squad, the standard squad, with bolters and plague knives, nothing upgraded. We have a second squad, more ranged oriented, with 1 blight launcher, 1 plasma, and the rest bolters and plague knives. We have a melee oriented squad with a flail, a cleaver, an axe, a mace of contagion plus axe, and a power fist for the champion for 146 points. So this squad has sacrificed a lot its range capabilities, but at least it has very many special melee weapons. And then we have the Plague Marines mixed squad, where we take a few, let's say, some weapons that are good on range and some weapons that are good in melee, some similar to what I did in my big Plague Marine analysis review, testing some of the squads. Then we have a squad, the squad of Poxwalkers, Chaos Cultists, the Blightlord Terminators in 2 configurations, a standard configuration with combi bolters and axes, which is the cheapest for 200 points, and a special squad, basically the squad that's on the box set on the front page, with a flail of corruption, Reaper autocannon, a spewer, a combi melta, and a combi plasma, and axes for 225 points. The Deathshroud Terminators, the Possessed, and the Chaos Spawn, and sometimes in the charge I will be adding some reference benchmarks from Space Marines, for example using Intercessors and Assault Intercessors, just to see how our units are faring against the Space Marines as a benchmark. So let's start with the range damage at 24 inches. So this is the plot of all the 11 squads from the previous page in the ranged damage per 100 point. So here is the damage each squad can make. Here you can see a bunch of different targets, starting with targets with very good invul saves like Gilliman, and then here we have 4+ invul saves, 5+ invul saves. Here all these targets don't have invul saves, and we can see, for example, here the Plague Marines range squad against Intercessors will be doing an average of 2.5 wounds per 100 points, while, for example, here we have the Blightlord Terminators, the special group, not so good. This is not very super in long range. In 24 inches, it would be doing 1 wound on average. And the standard, let's say the standard Plague Marines will be doing also a little bit more than 1 wound for this target. So here we can see that the ranged Plague Marine squad, the orange line, does the most damage per point, and the mixed Plague Marine squad is doing more damage than the standard per point. And the standard Plague Marines and the Blightlord Terminators are doing equal damage output per point. As expected, basically they have the same number of bolter shots per point, so there is not a huge difference in the damage output. The Blightlord special weapon squad I selected here is not very good at long range because it has the combi melt and the spewer that are not really doing so much in this range. And the cultists, the light green, are surprisingly good per points, especially versus some of these other weakest targets like guardsmen or cultists. They can pump out quite a lot of shots per point because they are shooting here 10 shots for 50 points. But this is one way of graphically showing you some comparison, gives you some understanding per different targets, and basically this is just a graph of a table I will show you in the next slide. So basically these are all the data that are going to making the graph, and you can pause if you want to see the damage per 100 points from different squads. You have all the squads here and all the targets here, and then in order to compare easier between the squads, instead of showing you the lines and the tables, I can take the average, for example, for the Plague Marines here. What is the average damage they are doing across all the targets? Just get one value for that. Doesn't give you the complete picture, but it will give, let's say, an overall picture, an overall understanding how damaging those units are compared to each other. So this is the graph. If I just take the average, for example, if I take the Plague Marines, how much damage did they do across all the targets I simulate? They would be doing 1.2 wounds per 100 points. So here we can see that here I've added the intercessors, a group of intercessors, and we can see that the only squad that does more range damage at 24 inches is the Plague Marines with ranged configuration when they have a Blight Launcher and a Plasma Gun supercharged. And here I haven't considered the buffs that we can say, but we can see, okay, if we add the buffs, for example, reroll once, Tallyman's +1 to hit, and the Tollkeeper Relic giving exploding sixes, we can boost the Plague Marines and the Blightlord's damage by 75%. Before I do that, it's worth also to see that the Plague Marines standard, Blightlord standard is very similar, but the Plague Marines ranged weapon can do more damage than Blightlords in the standard configuration. But if we add the buffs, we can see 75% more. The Plague Marines and the Blightlords can increase their damage. The Cultists cannot do that because they are not affected by any of these buffs. So with these buffs, we can do our units better damage performing than, for example, the benchmark intercessors. Of course, the intercessors might have other buffs, etc. for Space Marines, but it's just to show you that this is not the total damage. We can also add, of course, on top with several buffs. Looking at the range damage at 12 inches. At 12 inches, the Cultists suddenly get very good damage output per point because they are at rapid fire range with their autoguns, so you can get 20 shots for 50 points. So they can do quite a lot, actually. I was quite surprised by this. And we can see that the Plague Marines ranged special squad gives higher damage output than intercessors and also the Blightlords. And we can see here that the Blightlord special squad now at 12 inches can do better better damage now, because now the Spewer and the Melta are in range. Now we also see the Deathshroud Terminators. They can start doing something with the Plague Burst Gauntlets, but they're not super high. The mixed squad is better than the standard squad, and the Plague Marines melee squad has very little firepower. And yeah, so here is the range damage at 12 inches. And of course, Poxwalkers, Possessed, and Chaos Spawn don't have any ranged capabilities. And now let's move on to the melee damage. So here we see the melee damage per 100 points, averaged again across all targets. So we can see here that in melee damage, the Chaos Spawn and the Deathshroud give the absolute highest damage, and basically it's much higher damage than we saw in the ranged before. For example, here we already have 7 wounds on average across all the targets per 100 points. Here I use the Assault Intercessors having charged as the baseline. And we can see, and additional to this is the Deathshroud. Now they have 2 profiles with the Man Reaper. They help them do the optimal damage versus both stronger and weaker targets. And the Plague Marine melee squad is also very high. So this is the squad that has the Flail and the Cleaver and the Axes and the Mace of Contagion and the Power Fist. So actually you can make Plague Marines do very high damage if you want, but you saw on the previous page they had a very little ranged capability, of course. The Blightlords are not very very efficient in melee compared to some of the other choices. The Poxwalkers are doing okay, nice job here. The standard Plague Marines are not super high, but and then we can see the Possessed. The Possessed, they can do melee damage, but not as good as the Chaos Spawn or the Deathshrouds. So or a melee Plague Marine squad. And of course we can add the Talisman +1 to hit. That would buff the Plague Marines, the Deathshroud, and the Possessed by 25%. It wouldn't buff the Chaos Spawn. And the Biologus can add on top of this mortal wounds, for example, to standard Plague Marines with Trench Fighter, etc. So in this graph, I'm looking at the total damage, summing up the damage that each squad could do at 12 inches, together with what they could do in melee per 100 points, damage per 100 points. So here we can see where we have a stacked graph bar chart here. On the bottom, the blue is the range damage they can do at 12 inches, and then on top is the melee damage they could do at engagement range, of course. And here we can see across the squads, the Death Guard, FootSquads, Infantry squads are better hitting in melee than range damage. And Deathshroud and Chaos Spawn here are the biggest damage dealers per point due to their melee prowess. And the Plague Marines melee squad comes at the 3rd point here. And the mixed squad also performs quite well. So the mixed squad has a flail, a blight launcher, a power fist, and a plasma gun. So it can do quite good melee and also some good ranged damage here. Only in the range damage is the Plague Marines ranged group, which has the highest, let's say, blue chart. But all in all, melee seems to be where we are doing the most damage, and the Deathshroud, Chaos Spawn, and the Plague Marines can be made most efficient. Here we see the Possessed are somewhere in the middle here. They don't have ranged, and they are not as good per point in melee damage as, for example, Deathshroud and Chaos Spawn or melee oriented Plague Marines. Here we can see the Blightlords as well. The special unit comes here, and the Blightlord standard unit has not so high damage per point. So for 200 points, you don't get per point you don't get as much damage as some of the other units. And in here we have the Poxwalkers only having a melee damage. Let's say here we have the intercessors just an intercessor squad. So at least all our units are doing more total damage than a standard unit of intercessors. So with all this talk of shooting, let's talk about and damage. Let's talk about durability. So I've calculated the durability for all these units by calculating how many shots they can take before 100 points of the squad is killed. So correcting it to 100 points. So here I have been using a set of 11 standard weapons like a bolt rifle, a Gauss Reaper, a heavy bolter, etc. Some of these weapons that would probably hit our infantry units quite often, and I also have some anti-vehicle or tougher hitting weapons, and then I can calculate per 100 points how many, for example, a standard squad of Plague Marine can take 64 bolt rifle shots or 43 Gauss Reaper shots before 100 points are killed. So in this case it would be 5 models are killed almost, and here for example for Poxwalkers, the Poxwalkers will be able to take 54 Gauss Reaper shots before 100 points are killed, meaning 20 models dead in this case. To make the comparison easier, I focused on the top part of the weaponry. Let's say more the normal damage weapons here. How much the low damage anti-infantry weapons more or less, and I'm calculating the average, how many shots are they taking on average from these weapons, getting a figure there that I can compare across the units. So looking at the durability then, the average durability for the selected weapons here, how many shots they can be able to take per 100 points. And here I say that the intercessor squad has a reference durability of 100%, let's say 1, index 1. And then we can see here the most durable squad with the dark green are the baseline durabilities here. The most durable squad per points are the Blightlord Terminators, followed by the Deathshroud Terminators. And basically the Deathshroud Terminators, they have the same profile as the Blightlord Terminators for durability concerns. They have a 2+ save, 4+ invul save, 3 wounds, toughness 5. But the Deathshroud Terminators, basically they cost 50 points, where Blightlord Terminators as a standard, they cost only 40 points. So of course per point, the Blightlords are more durable. And then we see that the Chaos Spawn are very durable, and if we add the stratagem to give them more toughness and disgusting resilience, they become even more durable. The Plague Marines are also have good durability in the standard configuration. If the more special weapons we are giving them, here is the ranged squad, the melee squad, and the mixed squad, where we take a lot of special weapons. Of course, the durability drops, because instead of 21 points for 2 wounds, we are now paying 31 points for 2 wounds. And in this case, we get the durability now is very close to the intercessors, but we could do much more, let's say more damage than the intercessors in this configuration. Poxwalkers have also good durability. The possessed are a bit lackluster again, and the cultists have also the lowest durability in comparison to our other units. What we can see here is that of course we could use the plague surgeon. He can give a 6+ feel no pain, and he can help the Blightlord Terminators, the Deathshroud, the Plague Marines, and the possessed. And then you can see that the durability will increase by almost 20%. So those can benefit. The Chaos Spawn doesn't benefit from the surgeon, but it benefits from the stratagem upgrade. And the Poxwalkers and cultists cannot benefit from the plague surgeon. But we have some high durability. So for example, a Blightlord Terminator with a surgeon will be twice as durable as an intercessor in comparison. And as I said, Plague Marines and and Blightlord Terminators would be sacrificing durability when taking special weapons per point. So summarizing overall, the overall summary of numbers here, we have the different squads, and here we see the range damage at 24 inch, the range damage at 12 inch, and the melee damage, the average across the 31 targets I'm simulating. So we can see at the range damage, we have the Plague Marines range squad being the highest, and then we have the mixed squad of Plague Marines and the Cultists being able to do most damage per point. But of course, they are lower than the intercessors, as we saw. In 12-inch range, the Plague Marines range group and the Cultists and the Blightlord Terminators, the special squad with a spewer, etc., has a highest damage. And then when we look in melee damage, as we said, the Deathshroud and the Chaos Spawn, together with the melee-oriented Plague Marines, are the highest, the most hard-hitting units here. And then if we look at the durability, we see that the Blightlord Terminators were number one, followed by the Deathshroud and the Chaos Spawn. Of course, Deathshroud, the Terminators, and the Plague Marines and the Possessed could be increased by the Surgeon, but we can see here overall the Possessed don't sit in a very good place. So trying to summarize all these values per unit, I think the Poxwalkers come out as a quite durable unit with objective secure, and they have okay melee damage, especially with this mutated strange stratagem for mortal wounds. They are a cheap unit that can hold objectives, and their biggest problem is that they are quite slow and they cannot come upfield easily to do damage, for example, together with Typhus. And they can only do the death card specific action. Basically, all in all, they seem to be a good cheap unit to hold our backfield objectives. The Cultists are also a cheap unit, but it has the lowest durability compared to all the others per point. They have okay shooting for point cost, and they can. The important thing is that they can do actions, for example, raise banners and other actions for secondary objectives, but they don't have objective secure. So this can be a problem, keeping them in the backfield. If some other unit comes, then they can maybe not hold the objective like Poxwalkers will be able to do, maybe for one round more, and thus scoring you the primary objectives here. So probably better to choose Poxwalkers to keep backfield objectives, and maybe consider taking the death card specific secondary objective, which is an action they can do. If we look at the Plague Marines, they seem to be a good Swiss Army knife type of unit. It can be configured from the baseline to more ranged oriented or more melee oriented damage dealer. They can do good range and melee damage depending on the configuration, and they can be significantly buffed by Virion characters, auras, etc. being core, and they offer good durability per points, especially with the cheaper standard weapons. They are quite slow, but they can be transported in rhinos, which really improves how quickly they can come upfield. And also important that the characters that can buff them, they can follow them in the rhino. For example, you could have the Taliman there, you could have a Biologus there, you could have a Surgeon there to increase the durability. Everybody can follow in the Rhino, and they can come upfield and do the damage and hold the objectives. So also they have the objective secure ability, and this is very important. So basically, I think Plague Marines is the jack of all trades. They can be set out to hold backfield objectives. Maybe then you just keep the cheapest troop. You can take the midfield objectives. You can do the melee oriented damage unit buffed by the Biologus and Taliman, for example, and then they can come up and deal a lot of damage in melee, maybe in a rhino, take some objective and stay there. If we look at the Blightlord Terminators, They have the highest durability of all squads analyzed, but only, let's say, average damage in melee and ranged or combined damage, and typically they are lower than, for example, Plague Marines, and they are not as configurable as the Plague Marines, and sometimes they are even lower than benchmark Space Marines in how much damage they deal per points. They can be buffed again by similar characters and auras like the Plague Marines. However, those characters will have trouble joining the Blightlords on Deep Strike. So the Deep Strike ability, of course, is good. It can make the Blightlords very useful to contest objectives in the opponent's opponent's part of the board. They can do actions in the opponent's deployment zone, and they can be very tough to move out of there because they can, yeah, as we saw, very high durability. They can do both some range, they can do melee damage, they can do quite a lot of damage, and they can stay alive for a long time, scoring you secondaries and doing actions. The Deathshroud Terminators are monsters in melee, and they have also some shooting at close range. I think they pack a very good punch for 150 points for the smallest squad, and the durability per point is second only to the Blightlords. So their Man Reaper is really hard hitting, and it's very good that it has a dual profile melee weapon. Then you can select the profile that suits the target you are going after, and you can maximize your damage by doing that. So basically, also Deep Strike helps them. Deep Strike, get into melee, kill basically anything that comes in your way with the Deathshroud. And I think based on the stats and some of my first games and what I've seen they can do on the battlefield, seems to be becoming one of my favorite units in the new Codex. Yeah, so really strong in melee, and 150 points for the smallest squad. Then finally, the Possessed. I think they are. I have a very hard time seeing where they would fit in. They don't have any range damage. They have an okay movement of 7 inches, but there is no other quick delivery method other than putting them on a Land Raider. They have quite a low durability per point. They only got 2 wounds, even if Games Workshop alluded that they would probably go up to 3. Even if they make it upfield, their melee damage is not as high compared to some other units, for example the Deathshroud or the Chaos Spawn or Plague Marines with melee weapons that could come up on a transported in a Rhino and more consistently do their melee damage. With the Possessed, it's a bit more, yeah, they have to move up, and when they come there, they are not as good as some of the other units to do the damage. So I can't see the Possessed doing something that another of our units could do better, unfortunately. And then the Chaos Spawn seems to me like a quite interesting unit. They have the base melee damage and cannot be buffed, but cannot be buffed further by auras or the Virion characters, etc. With a pre-battle stratagem, they get toughness 6 and disgusting resilience, and making them even more durable per points compared to Blightlord Terminators, because they have 4 wounds and very high toughness and disgusting resilience. They can survive quite a lot of punishment. The minimum squad is only 1 model, basically, for 23 points, so they are quite cheap. They have a 7-inch move. They are like the Possessed. They have no means of quick delivery, but it's a better choice if you want to do melee damage and foot slog along. Then I would prefer to take the Chaos Spawn rather than the Possessed, because when they come into close combat, they will be doing much more damage than the Possessed. So, some final thoughts. To me, it seems like the Deathshroud Terminators seem like a top unit now. The Plague Marines, they offer versatility. They are transportable and highly buffable, and they can be configured towards more damage or more durability, and you can make squads for different roles. I think they are a jack of all trades, and of course as a troop we need to have a couple of those in our army. The Poxwalkers can fill a good role as cheap backfield objective holders. They are quite durable, they are replenishable, and they are immune to morale. Objective secure. They can keep the objectives. Of course, they cannot survive whatever is shot at them, but they will keep the objective for you until the last Poxwalker. The Blightlord Terminators, they have the best durability but average damage per points. They can deep strike, they can do damage, they can stay alive and take actions in the backfield of the opponent. So of course they also can do quite a lot. The Chaos Spawn is an interesting cheap choice for melee damage and very good durability if we take the stratagem. The Cultists are lacking in durability, but they are also a cheap unit that can do some ranged and can do some actions, but probably not as useful as the Plague Marine and Poxwalker combination. And then the Possessed, so far, I think is, for me, it's at least the biggest disappointment in the Codex. I can't seem to find something that they can be doing better than some of the other units. So I think here we will have to, yeah, I think they are in a tough spot where they cannot do something particularly interesting. So with these words concludes this rather lengthy video. I hope the data have been helpful, and let me know in the comments what you think about this this analysis. Which unit is your favorite, and what is your experience from maybe some first games? Can you recognize the calculations here, or is it something you think I've missed? If you like this video, please press like and subscribe to the channel to support the channel growing. And in the channel I will be posting more and more analysis of death card tactics. If you want to support my work even further, please visit my Patreon page and become a patron. As you might understand, making these videos takes quite a lot of time to calculate all these values for you guys. So with these words, General Yanis is signing out. Stay safe out there, and bye bye.